So our next speaker is a producer, and I struggled a little bit, and maybe Tess, you could tell us if you refer to yourself as a farmer or a rancher. This is a producer perspective on management-intensive grazing and silvopasture with sheep. And our presenter is Tess Hahn, and she is with Baba Blacktail Farm up here in North Idaho in Carywood. So Tess, I am going to go ahead and stop my share so that you can share your screen. Great, we see your presentation coming up. But I don't have your sound yet. And you'll just need to go to the top left and put it in slideshow mode from the beginning.
Do you hear me now?
I do hear you now. Thank you. Well, I think we're good to go.
Well, greetings to you all, and I want to thank the university staff for their tremendous help at helping me learn this technology so that we can do this today. I want to talk with you about management intensive grazing, but particularly about silviculture, silvopasture with sheep. The background on this is that I have a lot of grazing experience. I have, our setting is 3,000 foot elevation up in North Idaho. I have about 100 acres. 60 of that is the sheep enterprise and 40 is timber production. So of that 60, about 20 is field and 40 is silvopasture. So I have a good mix of them all. I had first off grazing experience and then also Master Forest Stewardship Program experience. And I do the teaching for 4-H, vet science, and so forth. One of the other things that's been kind of fun is that I made a bunch of websites. If you look at my website, you can find videos for people who are new to large animal and livestock care. And so I have videos on there about selecting breeding stock and birthing and how to milk a sheep and record keeping and veterinary science and book reviews and all kinds of crazy stuff. And so that's another place that you can get an idea of what is possible. So let's start with the idea of silvopasture. As some of the other presenters have mentioned, it can describe a variety of land uses, such as uniformly spaced trees with grazing in between or patchy tree spacing. You can also think of it as outdoor living barns and windbreaks. That's another possibility if you're in a windswept area. It can be fields that are converting to food forests, or it could be edges and alleys in the forest that you have that you're going to use as extra pasture. And we shouldn't forget the idea that it also can have implications for rainwater harvesting, the landscaping around ponds and so forth, and also for fire fuel and weed control. So today, my goal is to acquaint you with some of the options and some of the factors that you'll consider. I'll show you what worked for me and what didn't, and how it looks at my place. So in the beginning, you see that we have some pasture area within the forest. And then we got some sheep. And I started to learn a little bit more about what the sheep could do after trimming. And a ram. So think about it this way. Why did farmers even create open fields? For sunlight and for ease of movement. Because every acre is 4,300 square feet, 43,000 square feet of solar collector. So we want to make the best use of the sunlight that falls on your land. So to maximize the blades of grass and to maximize the efficiency of harvesting, and you asked whether I'm a farmer or a rancher. Well, I'm actually a grass grower, and the sheep are my workers that harvest it. So why do foresters care about canopy coverage? That's the number of the amount of canopy that covers the ground. Again, sunlight and ease of movement. So we want to maximize photosynthesis and make sunlight available to the best trees by removing the competition. So the key to life on Earth, as you all know, is photosynthesis. So silvopasture is good for you and for our planet. It's good for you in that multiple layers of production can even out your financial return from the land. You have short-term return, short-term income with the animals, and long-term with the plants, the trees that are growing. So it's not an all or nothing, and so you minimize your risk, or you reduce your risk, and you layer the amount of return that you can get from the same land. And altruistically, the highest amount of carbon sequestration of any ag system can be done with silvopasture. It's 2 to 3 times that of managed grazing by itself. How does it do this? It creates an upper storage layer of carbon in the wood, together with an underground storage in the roots and soil. So Paul Hahn wrote regenerative agriculture topics in his book Drawdown. You might want to consider. Cornell University studied reasons for and the challenges with silvopasture. The specialist there is Steve Gabriel, who's written books on silvopasture and small farms. So what those researchers found is that the main reasons people enjoy silvopasture is it gives shade or shelter for your livestock. It can expand your pasture acreage. It uses your woodland. It can increase your forage availability, especially in droughts, and it can manage undesirable vegetation. The challenges usually are fencing, establishing and maintaining fencing, but the big challenge is usually the lack of knowledge about the silvopasture management, and people are sometimes concerned that it will take too much time, or they have a lack of knowledge about forage and forage quality and how often to rotate the grazing. And typically there's a lack of support from agricultural extension organizations, but of course the U of I is making it very possible for all of us. So if you look at all the literature, to succeed with silvopasture, what do you need to do? There are really only about 5 things that you really have to think about, and these are the overview. So consider the sunlight needs of the forage and the trees. The trees can't be too close together, and the forage is going to require sunlight. So if you're planting trees, don't plant trees to the south of where you're trying to grow forage. I mean, you just think about the sunlight. You have to match animals to the land type and the stage of succession. As you may know, stage of succession oftentimes refers to forestry, like you have the pioneer species that come in and you just planted a bunch of western white pine, and so you don't put your stock on that right away. You could put chickens, but you wouldn't put cattle, so you match the land to the stage of succession, match the animals to the land and stage of succession. Also, as it was pointed out, Samantha was saying that different animals have different characteristics in their grazing, so it's very important to understand what each one likes. You could use pigs to root up and overturn, but you wouldn't want to put them on your best pasture necessarily. It's also so important to move the animals in rotation according to the regrowth of the vegetation and to keep them off long enough. People talk about sacrificial pastures or paddocks. I don't use that word. I call it the safe pen, and I keep the sheep safe from predators when their babies are coming, and I also keep the grass safe from the sheep by feeding them in the safe pen when the grass is not yet ready to be grown, to be grazed. So it's important also to match the trees to the site. and to encourage diversified plant communities. This could be in the form of a food forest. You think about the trees as the bones or the skeleton, and then add things accordingly. And, you know, I certainly wouldn't at 3,000 foot elevation here try to grow citrus trees, but other trees will grow exceedingly well here. So match your tree to the site and encourage a great diversity. This is particularly important if we have uneven weather. So you want to make sure something will survive. You can stack the management to save time and effort and to create a synergy of movement. So for instance, I put the gates located so that I can move the stock easily from one place to the other, and I don't create any dead ends. So now I get into the how to do it. The challenge that I had when I first started trying to mix grazing animals and forests was to actually know, what do I do first? Which way do I think about it? Because sometimes you have open areas that you're trying to put trees in, and sometimes you're trying to change the species of trees that you have in an area to make it, you know, if it had been hide graded before, you want to change it and put different species. So there are a lot of different things happening at the same time. So what to do first? I would suggest start with a forest stand management plan. So if you look at this slide, you'll see that when you come in here, here's the sheep barn, here's the hay storage, here's the farmhouse. There are some areas that are naturally dry, some areas that are naturally wet. This area is all timber production. It's a year-round stream, so you don't want to be mucking about with that. This area is more important for, I'm sorry, do you all see my cursor or no?
Yes, we do see your cursor, so that's perfect.
Thank you. So different areas require quite a different approach. This area is more silvopasture here and here and here. This area is more open pasture. This is my winter barn, if you will, to put stock in here so that they have shelter. And yet I keep them off of this area because this is the huge big trees. So you want to look at your land from the point of view of the hydrology, the slope, and the access. So winter access, of course, we have, 5 feet of snow up here. Winter access, I can come in here, I keep this open because I get to the house, and I can throw hay as needed along here. Winter access out here, not so much. This is a watershed area. The water comes down this way and down, so forth, and also down this way. So I think about the use of the land. This is going to be drier, drier, drier. This is going to be a wetter pasture. So it's important to know your land from that standpoint. And as was mentioned before, it's not all or nothing. Some areas you simply wouldn't want to use them. Like this watershed, I keep all animals out because the watershed is the area that supplies the ponds and so forth. The next thing is to assess the grazing areas and to kind of score each pasture area as for its potential based on sun and moisture and soil. So you can see there's hardly any soil, hardly any grass here, just a lot of weeds. This is the original 12 sheep. We started in 2012. And when you see later pictures of the same thing, you'll see it's changed quite significantly. So each pasture area can be quite different based on the soil. Then you make a grazing plan. This was, again, the original. This is what we started with. We've not seeded, we've not done anything, and you'll note some changes later. When you make your grazing plan, the whole thing is based on regrowth interval. That's the time that it would take to regrow the harvestable amount of grass at that particular site. So the regrowth area, if I can go back to here, the regrowth area here, let's see, right here, where it's wet, that regrows in 21 days. Over here, it regrows in 35 days. Over here, it might regrow in 40 days. So you have to kind of understand how the regrowth is going to go, and then put the sheep on it only at the right time so that they can harvest and then get them off. So here's an example of what you could use. This is electronet fencing that you just click together here, tie it together here. Livestock guardian dog, mobile water. We call it the Pina Colada wagon because it has a little umbrella. And we just move that along, and we have 2 troughs that we can keep clean, and it's easy to handle. Here's an example of trimming of trees to trim them up, and then we let the sheep in here and graze. This was the native soil here, and this is after 1 year of grazing with sheep. We've not seeded, we've not fertilized. They walk around fertilizing it, and that's what you can do. In the winter time or off season or autumn season, I feed out there in the bare spots, so it's adding organic to it. Here's an example of fencing. This is a silvopasture area here. My advice is don't underestimate the time that it takes to convert from forest land into pasture, if that's what you're trying to do, because the microbes have to change. It's a fungi-based versus bacterial dominant kind of fungi in the soil, and usually you're better off if you want pasture land by pasture, if you want forest by forest, but sometimes that's not possible. So you can read about the process of converting trees into pastures. First, I would suggest first thin or plant the trees a bit more densely, and then in a second pass you can weed out the weak ones. A forester will explain to you what a basal DBH of 40 to 60 is ideal. That means how far apart the trees are. Here's an example of what doesn't work. We took a field. This is where we're not really good farmland. We're on the mountainside. This is tractor work. I hired somebody to come in and plow it and seed it and fertilize it and everything. And this is just done by sheep. Here's an example. That's what grew with using that method. This is what grew with our method. It's not to say tractors are not good, but in this particular location, all I grew was rocks. And here's a more recent photograph of that same area. In the forest itself, you can graze. You have to have livestock guardians. Diversity of species really helps. You can see the spacing of the trees here. Spacing of the trees, so we have forage growing in between. This is the safe yard, and there's the trees beyond waiting their grass to grow. When you learn about grasses, you'll see that their roots grow at different rates in the different times of the year. You can add tannin producing forage, get rid of your thistles. Rows and alleys. This is a before, and here is with Silvopasture, and here's the gate area. Bird life is increased because they can take the sheep's wool and use it for nesting. And density is important. You have to have enough density. So we got a ram, and he took care of the density. They're very helpful. You can sometimes use them for grazing in between for fire reduction. They can be a little inquisitive. If you get one that with porcupine quills, put that burn gel on them and you can pull it out. But see what's possible with mixing both grazing animals and trees, and to make a very productive use of your land. It's important to train them. These come to a whistle because they know the next place they're going is a fresh green pasture. Thank you for your time. And are there any questions?
Great. That's an awesome presentation. Thank you so much. We do have a question. And the question is, could you speak a little bit more on tannins and getting rid of thistle?
Yeah, with tannins, there are different tannins will reduce bloat. So somebody asked a question earlier about legumes and the amount of legume in pasture. If you have a lot of tannin things like put some sunfoil or chicory or small burnet or something like that, then you can reduce the amount of bloat. So they're also anti-parasitic, but I find that moving the sheep every day to a new fresh pasture, and there's 21 days in between, I really have very minimal. One of my videos is about fecal egg counts. You can check and you can see that it really reduces it. If you put in trees, you can put willow, poplar, black locust, those kinds of things, and they'll eat a little of the lower vegetation, and that'll also help them with the high tannin.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question, what would you say is, could you talk a little bit more about burn cream and what that is?
Oh, burn cream you can get it at the pharmacy. It's a over-the-counter thing that you would put on if you got a burn. I mean, you could also use aloe, but burn cream has lidocaine in it. And so it's just a human over-the-counter thing that you put in your first aid kit. I keep it handy on the farm in case I have to do something with an animal. It anesthetizes the skin, and you can pull out porcupine quills. I just smeared burn cream over it and then waited a few minutes, and then it didn't hurt him so much.
Great, thank you. Um, and then what tips do you have for getting rid of thistle?
Right here, this kind of deep, this is very strong and this is very deep. And so you want to get the whole roots out. I pull them out, use gloves, of course. And then I actually just let those all dry out and I put them in the compost pile. And as long as you get there before it seeds, you're going to reduce your amount. We used to have nothing but knapweed and thistles in some of the pastures, and all I did was pull the big thistles so they wouldn't reseed. If you don't have time to do the actually pulling them out by roots, at least take a machete and go through there and chop them all off before they flower and can get out into your seed. And it'll take probably a year or two, but you'll get rid of all your thistles. I have almost no knapweed and almost no thistles ever in 100 acres, and I didn't spray anything. We're all organic.
Wow, that's great. We have another question, and that is, what type of pasture do you recommend for sheep?
I'm thinking that means what kind of pasture grass. Again, I started with very poor native, what was there. When I buy grass farm, I get orchard grass and stuff like when I buy hay, because it takes me $120 worth of hay per animal per winter. So I usually put in 20 tons of hay, and I try to get orchard grass. So probably someone else can tell you a little bit more about which grass to plant, because I've been using the native grasses and trying to get them to grow with, this is a very minimal input financial plan on this farm. It had to pay me, not me put a bunch of money in it. I'm sorry I'm not able to answer it better than that.
Oh, thank you. I think that was a good answer. It definitely depends on your situation and what you're trying to achieve. So with that, we don't have any more questions. Thank you very much for your presentation, Tess. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and talk about what's next. So next up, we have lunch, and we did originally schedule a half hour for lunch. However, we have a special presentation by one of our U of I Extension faculty who is now our sheep specialist. And so she's going to come on at 11:45.